You wake up every morning and put on a mask. Not a literal mask, but a carefully constructed version of yourself that the world expects to see. It's a performance that started so early in your life that you can't even remember when you learned the script. You smile when you should be crying, agree when you should disagree, fit in when every cell in your body is screaming to be different. You learn to laugh at jokes you don't find funny, to show interest in conversations you consider empty, to hide tears when a movie or song touches places in your soul that others don't seem to possess. And at the end of the day, when you finally take off this mask in the silence of your room, you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who's there. The person reflected seems like a stranger you created to survive in a world that punishes authenticity with isolation, rejection, and constant judgment. You feel guilty about something you can't even define, as if there were an invisible crime in simply being who you really are, as if your very nature were an offense you need to hide from the world to have the right to exist in it. Franz Kafka knew this inner prison intimately. He once wrote, "A cage went in search of a bird." This phrase reveals the modern tragedy of those who feel imprisoned by their own lives, desperately seeking something authentic within an existence that feels artificial. Kafka lived this contradiction daily, working during the day at a bureaucratic job he hated, fulfilling social obligations that suffocated him, living in a society that didn't understand his extreme sensitivity, carrying within himself an emotional intensity that the world saw as a defect or mental illness. He was a man who felt everything with a depth that hurt, who saw beauty where others saw only routine, who questioned truths that others accepted without thinking. That's why his literature is populated by characters who wake up transformed into insects, who are prosecuted for crimes they didn't commit, who seek castles they can never reach. These aren't just fantastical tales. They are precise maps of the experience of living differently in a world that demands conformity. But perhaps it's exactly this apparent curse that contains our greatest liberation, because Kafka showed us that it's possible to transform the pain of difference into art, isolation into insight, rejection into a silent revolution against a world that wants us smaller than we are. Difference isn't a crime, though society makes us feel like criminals for not fitting into its narrow and suffocating molds. Imagine for a moment an orchestra where all instruments try to sound like violins. No matter how well each musician plays, no matter how much technique they've developed, the result would be not a harmonious symphony, but a deafening and soulless noise. This is what happens when we deny our uniqueness in the name of conformity. We lose not only our own music, but we deprive the world of the unique beauty that only we can offer. A society of violins might be easier to manage, more predictable to control, simpler to categorize, but it will always be an impoverished society, devoid of the richness that comes from real diversity. Cellos bring depth, flutes offer lightness, drums provide rhythm, harps create magic. Each instrument has its unique function, its irreplaceable contribution. Similarly, each different person offers the world something that no one else can give. But for this to happen, we need the courage to play our own music, even when everyone around us is trying to convince us we should sound just like them. The world doesn't need more violins. It needs more people brave enough to be the instrument they truly are. Marina always knew she was different ever since she was little. While other children played with dolls or video games, she preferred to sit alone watching ants in the garden, imagining their tiny lives, creating stories about their invisible worlds. As a teenager, while her friends dreamed of weddings and conventional careers, she felt drawn to philosophy, to dense books that spoke about existence and death, to questions that had no simple answers, to conversations that lasted entire nights about the meaning of life and why things exist. Her parents worried, said she thought too much, that she should be more normal, more cheerful, more like other girls her age. For years, she tried to fit this contemplative and deeply sensitive nature into socially acceptable molds. She studied business because it was practical and would provide financial security, dated people who didn't understand her because it was normal, and everyone said she needed to be in a relationship, attended parties where she felt like an alien observing rituals of an unknown species because it was socialization, and isolation was seen as pathology. The result was a profound depression that made her wake up every day feeling like she was wearing clothes 3 sizes too big, and the constant sensation of betraying herself with every forced smile, every empty conversation, every moment she pretended interest in things that bored her deeply. It was only when she stopped apologizing for her depth, when she accepted that maybe it wasn't for everyone but was exactly what some people needed to find, that Marina discovered there were other people like her, people who also questioned, who also felt life with painful intensity, who also saw beauty in places where others saw only problems or unnecessary complications. The modern world has created a kind of invisible tribunal, where we are constantly judged for not being sufficiently similar to the silent majority that accepts everything without questioning. It's as if there existed an unwritten code, transmitted through disapproving looks, seemingly innocent comments, jokes that hurt more than they should, awkward silences when you express a genuine opinion. This code dictates how we should think, limiting our minds to safe and predictable thoughts, how we should feel, suppressing emotions that are considered excessive or inappropriate, and how we should behave, forcing us to play roles we didn't choose but were assigned without our consent. Anyone who dares to be different is immediately labeled as problematic, antisocial, complicated, dramatic, or simply weird. These labels function as sentences that follow us, influence how others see us, and, more dangerously, how we begin to see ourselves. Kafka masterfully described this dynamic in The Trial, where Joseph K. is accused of a crime that is never revealed, pursued by a Kafkaesque bureaucracy that operates without apparent logic, judged by laws that no one can explain. The crime of difference is exactly like this. You're guilty of something you can't even define, pursued by invisible judges you never see, but whose voices you constantly hear in your head, condemned by laws that were never written but everyone seems to know except you. It's a perfect system of social control, because the accused becomes their own executioner, policing their own thoughts, censoring their own words, dimming their own light so as not to disturb those who chose to live in the shadows. But here's the liberating revelation that Kafka offers us through his own tortured and luminous existence. The problem isn't with you. The problem was never with you. The problem is with a system that fears authenticity because it exposes its own contradictions, its own weaknesses, its own artificiality. When you allow yourself to be genuinely different, you become a mirror that reflects the unlived lives of others, the dreams they abandoned, the truths they chose to ignore, the courage they didn't have. That's why your difference bothers them so much. Not because you're wrong, but because you're too right. Not because you're less, but because you're more authentic, more courageous, more willing to pay the price of truth. And that price is high. Loneliness, misunderstanding, judgment, rejection. But the alternative is even more expensive. Losing yourself, betraying your own soul, the slow death of everything unique in you. Kafka consciously paid this price, chose the solitude of authenticity instead of the company of false acceptance. He knew it was better to be rejected for being real than accepted for being fake. This is the wisdom he left us. Difference isn't a defect to be corrected, but a force to be cultivated. Not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be unwrapped. Not a curse to be broken, but a blessing to be embraced. Paulo was the son who always disappointed his parents without being able to understand why, carrying a guilt that seemed to have been born with him. Since childhood, he was too gentle for his family's masculine standards, cried when he saw injured animals on the street, preferred books to soccer, felt more comfortable talking with his grandmother about plants than with his cousins about cars and conquests. He was too sensitive for the business world his father wanted him to embrace, got physically sick when he saw people being humiliated or mistreated, couldn't understand how others could be cruel and still sleep well at night. He was too much of a dreamer for the practical reality everyone expected him to accept, spent hours looking at clouds and making up stories, believed people were fundamentally good until proven otherwise, saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. For years, Paulo hated himself for not being able to be the son everyone wanted, the man society expected, the successful masculine version that would make his parents proud of him. He forced himself to be tougher with others and himself, more ambitious even when it went against his values, more normal even when it meant betraying everything he believed in. He tried to like things that bored him, pretended not to care about injustices that made him cry, hid his sensitivity as if it were a shameful disease. But the more he tried to fit in, the more he felt like an actor poorly playing a role that wasn't his. a role that would never be his because it wasn't written for someone like him. The transformation began when he read Kafka's The Metamorphosis during an existential crisis at age 30. For the first time, he saw his own experience reflected in literature. Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed into an insect, but Paulo realized that the real metamorphosis wasn't physical, but psychological. The liberation from trying to be who you're not. The courage to accept who you really are. The relief of finally stopping the fight against your own nature. The existential guilt we carry for being different is fed by a fundamental lie that was planted in our minds since childhood. The idea that there's a right way to be human, a standard model we should all aspire to. This lie is perpetuated by institutions that benefit from our insecurity, by families that project their own fears and frustrations onto us, by societies that need uniformity to maintain control. But observe nature for a moment. Really observe. There are no two identical trees, even of the same species. Each grows according to the soil where it's planted, the light it receives, the winds it faces. There are no two identical sunsets. Each is a unique work of art, created by the specific interaction of atmospheric factors at that precise moment. There are no two fingerprints that repeat in all of humanity. Each person literally carries in their hands the physical mark of their uniqueness. Diversity isn't just accepted in nature, it's essential for survival, for evolution, for the beauty of the world. It's only in human society that we developed this sick obsession with uniformity, this neurotic need for everyone to think alike, feel alike, behave alike, as if difference were a threat instead of being exactly what strengthens us as a species. The guilt we feel for being unique is artificial programming that was installed in us by systems that fear our uniqueness because they don't know how to control it, how to sell it, how to use it for their own purposes. Kafka shows us that the absurd isn't in being different, but in trying to be the same. When Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed, the real tragedy isn't his metamorphosis, but his family's reaction that can't accept this transformation. They're more worried about appearances, about what the neighbors will think, about maintaining normalcy, than about understanding and embracing what Gregor has become. How many times does this happen in our own lives? How many times do we reject authentic aspects of ourselves because we know others won't understand? There's a cruel psychology behind social pressure for conformity. When someone has the courage to be different, it reminds others of all the times they didn't have that same courage. Each authentic person we meet becomes a painful mirror that reflects our own personal betrayals, our own compromises, our own moments of cowardice. That's why it's easier to attack difference than to admire it, more comfortable to criticize authenticity than to celebrate it. When someone tells us we're weird or too different, what that person is really saying is, "You remind me of what I could have been if I had been braver." It's a disguised confession of criticism, a veiled recognition that they too feel this same inner difference, but chose to suffocate it instead of expressing it. The fear of difference is, deep down, the fear of freedom. Because being different means taking responsibility for your own choices, your own values, your own life. It's easier to follow society's instruction manual than to write your own script. It's safer to walk on tracks that everyone has already traveled than to open your own path. But Kafka teaches us that this security is an illusion, that following the path others laid out for us is the most guaranteed way to waste our one life. The prison of conformity is built with the invisible bars of fear and cemented with the desperate need for external approval. It's a peculiar prison because the keys are always on the inside, within reach of our hands, but we convince ourselves that someone else needs to free us. We spend years waiting for other people to give us permission to be ourselves, as if our own nature needed validation from others to exist. But Kafka offers us the keys through his own words. You do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen. Simply wait. Be quiet, still, and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. This quote reveals a profound truth. When we stop trying to please the world and start listening to our own inner voice, we discover that our difference isn't a defect that needs to be fixed, but a gift that needs to be unwrapped. But this inward journey requires courage, because what we find there isn't always comfortable. We find parts of ourselves we learn to reject, aspects of our personality that were criticized from early on, dreams that were ridiculed, sensitivities that were called excessive. It's like exploring a house abandoned for years. You find treasures covered with dust, but also ghosts you thought you had forgotten. The liberating difference is realizing that these ghosts only have the power we give them, that these internalized criticisms are just echoes of voices that may not have even been qualified to judge us. There's a cruel irony in the fact that the people who most changed the world were exactly those who refused to fit into it. Van Gogh, misunderstood in life, painted with an emotional intensity that others considered madness, created works that today are revered, but in his time were seen as flawed. Einstein, considered a problematic student by teachers, thought so differently that he revolutionized our understanding of the universe. But it took years for his genius to be recognized. Tesla, seen as eccentric by contemporaries, had visions of the future that seemed like science fiction. Invented technologies we use today, but died poor and alone. Frida Kahlo transformed her physical and emotional pain into visceral art that spoke truths other artists didn't have the courage to express. Marie Curie faced prejudice and discrimination for being a woman in a scientific world dominated by men, but persisted in her research and became the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different fields. Kafka himself, who died thinking his work was a failure, asking his friend Max Brod to burn all his manuscripts, is today recognized as one of the most important writers in the history of world literature. His stories about alienation, absurdity, and the modern human condition speak to generations of people who feel lost in a world that doesn't understand their sensitivity. The world needs different people, but punishes those who dare to be so. It's a paradox that only resolves when we understand that our difference isn't to be cured, but cultivated, not to be hidden, but celebrated, not to be diminished, but amplified until it resonates with other souls who also carry this unique mark of courageous authenticity. Have you ever felt like you were living on an alien planet surrounded by people who speak a language you don't completely understand? I'm not talking about the language itself, but the language of social conventions, the interests everyone seems to share, the jokes that make everyone laugh except you, the priorities everyone considers important, but that seem completely empty to you. It's as if there were an instruction manual for life that was distributed to all children in kindergarten, but you were absent that day and nobody ever gave you a copy. Everyone knows the rules of the game except you. Everyone understands the references except you. Everyone fits in naturally except you. And the more you try to decipher this social code, the more obvious it becomes that you're pretending, playing a role you don't master, wearing clothes that don't fit your emotional body. This feeling of not belonging is one of the loneliest experiences a human being can have. It's different from physical loneliness when you're alone at home. It's existential loneliness of being surrounded by people, but feeling fundamentally disconnected from all of them. It's the sensation of watching life through glass, seeing others live experiences that seem authentic while you feel like a permanent observer, as if you've been condemned to be an eternal outsider of your own life. I know you do, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever carried this invisible guilt of simply being who you are, if you've ever felt guilty for not being able to be normal even when trying desperately, write in the comments just, "I am different." You don't need to explain anything else. Just these 3 words. Because when you do that, you're declaring your freedom from a prison that only exists while you hide in it. You're giving permission for other people to do the same. You're lighting a small light in the dark so other lost souls can find their way back home, which isn't a geographical place but the inner place where you finally accept yourself as you are. The Kafkaesque journey of accepting your own difference isn't easy, and anyone who promises it is lying to you and themselves. It's a journey that requires courage to face not only external judgment, but mainly internal judgment that is often much crueler. It requires that we abandon the comfortable fantasy that we'll be loved by everyone if we just try hard enough to be acceptable, and embrace the liberating reality that we'll be understood by few. But those few will be worth more than 1,000 superficial approvals from people who only accept us when we're a diluted and harmless version of ourselves. This journey has predictable stages. First comes denial, when we try with all our might to fit in, modifying our personality like someone changing clothes until finding something that pleases others. Then comes anger, when we realize that no matter how hard we try, we'll never be truly accepted by the majority, and we feel a just fury against a world that taught us to reject ourselves. Then comes bargaining, when we try to find a middle ground, being authentic only in safe spaces or with right people, but still hiding the rest of the time. Then comes sadness, mourning for the life we could have had if we had learned from early on that our difference was a gift, not a curse. And finally, if we're lucky and brave enough, comes acceptance. Not a passive and resigned acceptance, but an active and revolutionary acceptance that says, I am this way, this is valuable, and the world needs what only I can offer. There's a moment in the life of every different person when they need to make a fundamental choice that will define the rest of their existence. Continue betraying themselves to be accepted, or start accepting themselves to be true. It's a choice that seems simple when explained like this, but in practice is one of the most difficult a human being can face. Because choosing authenticity means renouncing the illusion of control over how others see us, means accepting that some people will reject us not despite who we are, but exactly because of who we are. It means facing the primordial fear of abandonment that we all carry since we were born, dependent on others for our survival. It's a choice that isn't made once in a dramatic and illuminated moment, but every day, in every conversation where we feel the temptation to agree with something we don't believe, in every decision where we weigh our integrity against our social security, in every moment when we feel the invisible but real pressure to be smaller than we are, less intense, less questioning, less inconveniently authentic. Kafka made this choice through his writing, which became his form of silent resistance against a world that wanted to mold him in its image. Even knowing he would be misunderstood, even predicting he would be rejected, he continued exploring the darkest and truest labyrinths of human experience, giving voice to feelings others didn't have the courage to recognize, naming fears others preferred to ignore, illuminating dark corners of the soul that others preferred to keep in shadow. His work is a testament to the courage necessary to be different in a world that rewards conformity and punishes originality. Lucia grew up believing that her extreme sensitivity was a weakness she needed to hide from the world, as if it were a shameful disability that made her inadequate for real life. She cried watching emotional commercials on television, physically felt others' pain as if it were her own pain, absorbed people's emotions around her like an emotional sponge that didn't know how to protect itself. In shopping centers, she became overwhelmed by hundreds of simultaneous conversations, bright lights, the agitated energy of crowds. She needed hours of absolute silence after any social event to process the emotions she had involuntarily absorbed from the world. Her family constantly criticized her for being too dramatic, too sensitive, for taking everything too seriously. For years, she desperately tried to harden herself, build emotional barriers, create psychological armor that would protect her from feeling so intensely. She took anxiety medications, went to therapy to learn to be more normal, forced herself to frequent environments that exhausted her just to prove she could be like other people. But it was while volunteering with special needs children at a local institution that Lucia discovered that her supposed weakness was actually a rare and valuable superpower. Her ability to feel deeply allowed her to connect with autistic children that other adults couldn't reach. She perceived subtle changes in their mood before even their parents noticed. She could calm emotional crises because she really felt what they were feeling, not just observed from outside with intellectual compassion. What society saw as a defect, these children experienced as a rare gift of genuine understanding. For the first time, Lucia understood that maybe the problem wasn't her sensitivity, but a world that had become too insensitive, that had confused emotional hardness with strength, that had forgotten that feeling deeply is a form of intelligence, not a form of weakness. The Kafkaesque transformation isn't about becoming normal, but about becoming courageously abnormal. It's about embracing our strangeness as a unique form of art that only we can create. Our sensitivity as a form of wisdom the world needs but rarely values. Our difference as a form of irreplaceable contribution to the human tapestry. Kafka teaches us that the most important metamorphosis isn't transforming into something others accept, but transforming into who you really are, regardless of others' acceptance. It's the metamorphosis from comfortable lie to inconvenient truth, from external approval to internal approval, from suffocating conformity to liberating authenticity. The world is literally full of people who spent their entire lives trying to be the right version of themselves, the version their parents wanted, that their teachers expected, that their bosses rewarded, that society applauded, and these people died without ever discovering who they really were underneath all these expectations. They died as strangers to themselves, having lived borrowed lives, rented dreams, second-hand personalities. Don't make this mistake. Don't allow your one life to be wasted trying to be a poorly made copy of someone you were never meant to be. Your difference isn't an accident that needs to be corrected, not a factory defect that needs to be fixed, not a programming error that needs to be debugged. It's a conscious decision of life, a work of art in progress, a unique experiment that has never been tried before and will never be repeated after you leave. Kafka spent his days working at an insurance company, fulfilling social obligations that suffocated him, being the dutiful son his family expected, the competent employee his bosses wanted, the respectable citizen society demanded. But it was in the silent early morning hours, alone with his words and his inner demons, that he found his true identity and created works that would speak to lonely hearts for generations and generations. He taught us that it's possible to live a double life, not in the sense of betrayal or lies, but in the sense of preserving a sacred space where your true nature can breathe, grow, and express itself, even when the rest of the world demands conformity. Maybe the invisible crime isn't being different, but allowing our difference to remain invisible out of fear of judgment. Maybe the real betrayal isn't failing to fit into the molds others created for us, but succeeding in nullifying ourselves to fit into spaces too small for our soul. Kafka invites us to commit a conscious and revolutionary crime, the crime of being authentically ourselves in a world that profits from our insecurity, that feeds on our conformity, that wants us small and controllable instead of big and free. When you finally embrace your difference as a gift instead of a curse, something magical and transformative happens in your life. You stop attracting people who want to change you, fix you, improve you, and start magnetizing those who celebrate who you are without wanting to add or subtract anything. You stop investing your precious energy trying to convince others of your worth and start investing in discovering the infinite depth of that worth that was always inside you. You abandon the golden prison of external approval and find the true freedom of internal acceptance, which doesn't depend on anyone's mood, the trends of the moment, or opinions that change with the wind. The Kafkaesque metamorphosis is painful because it involves the symbolic death of who you thought you should be, and the courageous birth of who you always were underneath the layers of social conditioning. It's like carefully removing layer after layer of old paint from an ancient painting to reveal the original masterpiece that was hidden underneath, patiently waiting to be rediscovered. The process is laborious, sometimes destructive, often lonely, but the result is the discovery of a unique beauty that was always there, waiting to be recognized and honored. Your invisible crime of being different is actually your most visible and valuable gift to a world that desperately needs real diversity, not just the superficial kind that's politically correct to celebrate. Each person who had the courage to be genuinely unique opened a pioneering path so others could also be, created a precedent that it's possible to survive being authentic, planted a seed of possibility in minds that until then couldn't imagine this was allowed. Van Gogh didn't know that his anguished brushstrokes and melancholy sunflowers would give permission to future generations of artists to express their own anguish and melancholy through art. Kafka couldn't imagine that his misfitted characters and absurd stories would offer comfort and understanding to millions of future misfits who would read his words and feel less alone in the world. You don't know how many people are silently waiting for you to have the courage to be different, so they too can allow themselves this transformative liberation. Difference is contagious in the best possible way, spreading from person to person like a silent revolution of authenticity. When one person allows themselves to be genuinely unique, they unconsciously give permission for others to do the same, creating waves of liberation that spread far beyond what they can imagine. It's like lighting a single candle in a completely dark room. Suddenly other people can see that they also have the right to shine with their own light, that they too can be sources of illumination instead of just consumers of others' light. Kafka lit his candle through the words he left us, but you can light yours through the simple but revolutionary courage of simply existing as you really are, without apologies, without justifications, without the need to convince anyone that you deserve to be here. If you've made it this far in this journey of words and reflections, it's because your soul recognized a truth that your mind is still learning to completely accept. You don't need to apologize for being who you are. You don't need to dim your light so others feel more comfortable in the darkness they chose. Your difference isn't a defect that needs to be hidden like a family shame, but a gift that needs to be shared like a rare treasure. This space exists specifically for people like you, who understood that life is too short and too precious to be wasted trying to be someone you're not, who recognize that authenticity is an act of rebellion in a world that constantly pressures us to be poorly made copies of other people. Subscribe to be part of a growing community that celebrates the courage to be authentic in a world that constantly pressures us to be poorly made copies of other people. Every week we explore together the winding and sometimes difficult paths that lead from suffocating conformity to true liberation, from the social mask to the true face, from the invisible crime to visible and celebrated innocence, because your difference isn't a cosmic accident that needs to be corrected, but a planned miracle that needs to be lived fully, honored deeply, and shared courageously with a world that may not completely understand, but will certainly benefit from your courage to be exactly who you are.